Gideon was shoved forward and he glared at Kale. Nikolai was standing before them and Gideon turned to the leader. Kale was a bastard, but he didn't really have any power in this situation. Gideon flicked his head so his hair was out of his face. "Ah, Nikolai, old pal. You have really bad timing. I'm courting a lady and you have really put a kink in my plans of amour." Nikolai snarled silently, wrinkling up his nose. "Professor, your jovial nature seems very misplaced. If you try to escape again, I will kill your crew. Including your lady friend." Gideon waved off the threat with his tied hands. "Oh, they aren't my crew. They are Hara's. I'm not sure why she keeps picking up strays, but it seems to make her happy." Gideon wanted to rip Nikolai apart for the threat to Hara, but that wouldn't be very productive at this point while Gideon didn't have access to the teeth and claw which would do the most damage. Nikolai cut him off. "Enough, Professor. We are willing to let you live and your strays, as you call them, if you will fix something for us." Hara had hinted to him before they had arrived that the thing needing fixing was meant to kill dragons. Gideon was sure of it. There weren't many mathematicians who could calibrate a weapon to shoot something out of the sky. None of them could predict a dragon's movements enough to make it accurate enough to be a danger to any dragon. But with him, that was a different thing. The ones who had captured him for the Roshbarkers had probably assumed because he had no liking for the Empire rules, he hated the Empire. Gideon motioned with his tied hands to indicate he knew about the weapon. "Yes, your lackey here mentioned something along those lines. So what is this thing you want me to fix? I would appreciate if we could hurry this along so I can get back to my lady." Nikolai didn't seem pleased Kale had been sharing secrets. "That is not important. You just need to fix it." Gideon would enjoy annoying the Roshbarkers for the threat they were to Hara. "Oh, I disagree. If it is a machine to make chopped liver, then the equations are very different from saying something which flies through the air. So I do need to know what the machine does." There was a long silence from everyone in the room. Nikolai liked his men to crowd around him, it seemed. As there were twice as many men this time as there had been when they had opened his crate in the inn after the first time they had kidnapped him. Nikolai eventually said, "It is a machine which shoots bolts of steel into the sky. We have tried it and it shoots, but with no accuracy. We need you to fix this." Gideon shrugged. "No problem. I might need Hara's help. She is a brilliant engineer as well as the captain. I'm good with numbers, but just look at these hands. Do they look like they have done a day of work in my life? Heaven forbid I might mess up my manicure." Gideon wriggled his fingers in Nikolai's face. Nikolai narrowed his eyes, but ignored his rant and instead said, "Your friends will be staying here on the ship. As a guarantee for your good behavior. You will have to fix it on your own. Even if it means breaking a nail." Gideon knew all their lives were measured in hours instead of years as long as that machine was working. For both dragons and the Roshbarkers. While it existed, the dragons would stop at nothing to destroy it and they wouldn't care who was in the way either. He would have to do something to stall. He would know when he saw the machine. It would have been easier with Hara. She would have been able to put something together with a piece of string and a rubber band which would take down all these men. Ah well, he would have to come up with something. Hopefully, it wasn't a terrible idea. Gideon asked, "Why do you need a weapon like this, anyway? You guys look like strong men." He eyed up one of the men standing next to Nikolai. The man looked like he had more muscles than brains. When the man glared at Gideon, he blew him a kiss. The Roshbarker frowned in confusion. Nikolai spat on the ground and said, "We are staring down the barrel of the Empire guns and you ask why we would need a weapon. We do not wish to be the next piece of land to be added to the Empire. We will not be trodden down in the dust." Nikolai went on for a while berating the Empire and how they, the last bastion of the Roshian people, would fight to their dying breath. The typical rhetoric of revolutionaries, and none of it really meant anything. Gideon wished he had one of those machines which could record sound and show these people what was really coming out of their mouths, but he doubted it would make any difference. All he could do was stall until he found a way to escape. Hopefully a way which destroyed the weapon at the same time. Oh, and of course free Hara. If she hadn't managed to come and swoop him off his feet in the meantime. He didn't want to bet who did the rescuing first, as he wasn't sure he would win. He grinned at the thought of Hara rescuing him, but Nikolai thought it was for something he had said. Nikolai grunted and said, "Good. Then you will fix the machine for us." Gideon blinked in confusion. Nikolai didn't seem to notice and motioned for all of them to leave the airship. Hara felt Angel behind her. She scratched at Hara's wrists and she was about to shoo the small clockwork dragon away. Angel then started gnawing on her ropes, which bound her hands behind her. Hara shifted forward a little to give Angel more room. Her timing was off as Kale returned and eyed her suspiciously. Liam asked softly, "What do you think they will do to us?" Kale glanced at the boy and then went to the door, where another guard waited. Hara said, "Once they get what they want, they will kill us and drop our bodies in a place where we will never be found." Murphy grunted and said, "If we are lucky and they don't have any other need for us." He turned his head and eyed Liam and continued. "You are a pretty boy. I wonder what kind of price you will get on the slave market." Liam went white and Alice hissed at Murphy. "You don't have to scare the boy. We all know what we would be in for if we were sold as slaves." That might be true for Alice, who had an inkling of what men wanted from her. Liam probably knew as well what someone would want from him as well. Talon said, "It won't come to that." Murphy sneered. "Oh, so you reckon you can escape?" Hara hissed. "Leave it alone, guys. We won't be sold as slaves and we aren't going to be killed. I promise you that." Angel finished chewing through her ropes, but Hara didn't move. Angel hesitated, then must have realized what Hara wanted and moved out from behind her and moved on to the others. Gideon had managed to fix the weapon in a few minutes. The equations to hit what the weapon was aimed for had been simple, and all it had needed to be done was the tightening of some things and making sure the ring used to aim was in the right spot. Gideon had that in his hand now as he waved it around and nattered. He didn't know how long it would take for Hara to come to him, but he had to stall until then. He had already figured out what to do with the weapon before he left to make sure the weapon wouldn't harm anyone. The winch was powered by a steam engine and it wouldn't take much to make the whole contraption overheat and blow itself up. Nikolai was watching him himself. He had actually sent away his entourage. Gideon tapped the weapon with the aiming tool and said conversationally while Nikolai winced at his cavalier nature. "So this is to kill dragons. What have dragons done to you, by the way? I mean recently. I know they used to chomp on people and eat them. They haven't done that in hundreds of years." Nikolai grunted and said, "They are the tool of the Empire and the Empire wants to chew us up. That is just as bad." Gideon leant on the arm of the large crossbow-like thing and said, "True. You'd think the government would agree with you. Surely it would be easier to fight this war with the government on your side." Nikolai snorted. "They are fools. They coddle up to the Empire in an attempt to convince them not to attack. It is a fool's task. You can't negotiate with a beast." Gideon lifted his hand and motioned to the wrists and asked, "Where did you get these?" Nikolai growled. He was obviously tired of the talking. He pulled out a gun and pointed it at Gideon. "Fix it or die, Professor." Gideon lifted his hands to show he was defenseless and said, "Easy, easy. I'm delicate, you know. I faint at the sight of blood. Especially my own." Nikolai huffed, but put down his gun and Gideon placed the aiming ring where it was supposed to be. As he worked, Nikolai said, The wrist guards are to make sure you don't go nowhere. Gideon knew that, but he was curious what Nikolai and the Roshbarkers thought. Still fiddling with the ring, he asked without looking at Nikolai. How does that work? He could see out of the corner of his eye that Nikolai shrugged. Magic, I suppose. A bit like the magic the dragon hunters have. I'm just not sure how it works for you. But the people said it was the only way to make you stayed in one place. And as you can see, it has worked. I think you might have some dragon hunter blood in you, and that is why it works. He wasn't wrong there, but it wasn't quite right either. The dragon hunters were gypsies. Moving from area to area hunting dragons. They were almost completely wiped out by both humans and dragons since the treaty was signed. They were the only ones not safe under that contract. Gideon had known a few in his day, and the hunting of them had only made the dragon hunters irrational and more dangerous. Their magic was completely their own and had nothing to do with the dragons. They were still on the bridge of the blazing blunderbuss. Hara's leg had gone to sleep sometime before, so she was trying to get it past the pins and needles stage by stretching it out and banging her heel on the floor to encourage the blood to flow a little quicker. One of the Roshbarkers yelled, "Stop that!" Hara glared at the revolutionary and said, "What do you want me to do? Sitting on the ground is not the most comfortable thing. My leg and left butt cheek have gone to sleep." Alice snorted. Hara glanced at her. She would have thought the girl would have been scared by the sudden violence, but the girl actually looked energized. This was one Pandora's box Hara had not expected to open.